Before we begin, tell me, where in the world are you watching from, and what time has found you? There are stories about secret groups, hidden in forests, beneath churches, below cities, whose members whisper to things that aren't gods, but remember being worshipped. These aren't just cults in the ordinary sense. They don't seek power, salvation, or even survival. What they serve doesn't speak in words, and what they believe can't be unlearned. This is the story of the most terrifying cult ever imagined in cosmic horror. Not because of what it does, but because of what it knows. It doesn't want to change the world. It wants to return it to what came before humans, before language, before time. Writers like Lovecraft didn't invent this from nothing. He drew from real fears, of ancient religions, of lost knowledge, of silence deeper than death. His cults didn't feel fictional because they weren't entirely made up. They echoed something older, something already buried in myth, in history, in us. We'll look closely, not just at stories, but at the roots behind them, the ideas, the symbols, the philosophies, and we'll follow them wherever they lead. You don't need to believe in anything to feel it watching. Listening is enough. Let's begin. Across early 20th century literature, few motifs arrive as fully formed and as quietly disturbing as the image of a hidden cult kneeling in darkness, murmuring syllables no human throat should pronounce. The moment H.P. Lovecraft introduced the esoteric order of Dagon or the swamp-born worshippers of Cthulhu, something changed. These weren't merely fictional sects. They felt recovered. That distinction matters. They were not framed as contemporary threats, but as fragments of some older truth resurfacing. This decision was not incidental. It was a deliberate narrative choice rooted in Lovecraft's cultural moment, a time saturated with fear of degeneration, fascination with primitive religions, and the widespread collapse of Enlightenment optimism. These cults emerge at the intersection of anthropology and anxiety, ritual as the mask of something more ancient than belief. Lovecraft lived during a time when anthropology was not a science of understanding, but of classification. Texts like James Frazer's The Golden Bough, 1890, popularized the idea that all religions evolved from earlier, more savage practices. Lovecraft absorbed this framework but reversed its moral logic. For him, the oldest practices weren't crude. They were closer to the real. The cult didn't represent ignorance, but exposure. His characters didn't descend into madness because they misunderstood. They went mad because they understood too well. This twist transformed the cult from a backdrop into a philosophical weapon. It destabilized not just sanity, but the entire narrative authority of modernity. Consider this carefully. Lovecraft's cults function less like institutions and more like gravitational wells. One doesn't join them. One is pulled in. His personal letters reveal a fear of modern decay disguised as elitist misanthropy. He speaks of biological degeneration, racial decline, and the erosion of rational order. However grotesque, these views illuminate something structurally significant. Lovecraft envisioned civilization as a thin crust. Beneath it, the swamp. Cults in his stories emerge from that imagined swamp, not merely as remnants of old belief systems, but as signs that those systems never left. The Call of Cthulhu famously juxtaposes the cult's scattered rituals across continents, suggesting that disparate societies echo the same truth. Here, geography becomes a false comfort. If the cult appears everywhere, then perhaps it precedes culture altogether. But the cults were never monolithic. Lovecraft didn't construct them like organized religions with dogma and doctrine. Instead, he presented fragments, broken rituals, forbidden books, mad testimonies. This incompleteness wasn't due to narrative laziness. It was the point. The more incoherent the cult appeared, the more authentic it felt. Real mystery doesn't explain itself. In this way, Lovecraft weaponized ambiguity. A chant half remembered becomes more chilling than an entire theology. A ritual hinted at, but never fully described, carries more weight than one witnessed in full. The absence of detail creates interpretive space, and within that space, fear breeds. Modern horror often relies on visibility, masked figures, demonic apparitions, blood rituals. Lovecraft's cults operate in negative space. Their true power lies in what they imply about time, about the limits of knowledge, about the role of humanity in the cosmos. They are not malevolent in the conventional sense. They do not hate humans. They barely notice them. This, in turn, reframes their worship. Not love, not loyalty, but orientation. The cultist is one who has simply accepted a reality most others are unequipped to perceive. It is not a conversion. It is a return. Not enlightenment, but exposure. We must pause here and observe a final irony. While Lovecraft styled himself a strict materialist, the cults he imagined operate like inverted theologies. They possess initiation, revelation, even a form of transcendence, albeit one that annihilates rather than elevates. In crafting these elements, Lovecraft created a template that many later writers would follow, the hidden society as a vessel for cosmic terror. Yet it is not their secrecy that terrifies, it is their accuracy. These cults don't represent madness, they represent consistency with a deeper, more frightening world model. The horror lies not in their beliefs, but in the possibility that they are correct. This brings us naturally to the question of influence. Where did these ideas come from? What older myths, philosophies, or cultural fears shaped the image of the cosmic cult long before Lovecraft refined it? To answer that, we turn next to the ancient and the esoteric, to the cultural and philosophical antecedents buried beneath the stories. The shape of the cult was not born in fiction, it was inherited. And in that inheritance, we find the shadow of something older. Cosmic horror cults did not emerge from nothing. Their architecture, ritual secrecy, blasphemous purpose, and the quiet certainty that reality is a lie has deep roots in human thought. Long before Lovecraft sketched his scattered worshippers of Cthulhu or the Order of Dagon, cultures around the world spoke of forbidden rites, of unspeakable names, of gods best left asleep. These weren't merely tales of superstition, they were reflections of philosophical doubt. Fear, in such stories, is not tied to evil, it's tied to the ungraspable. And where certainty ends, ritual begins. We find early echoes in the mystery religions of the ancient Mediterranean. The Eleusinian mysteries, devoted to Demeter and Persephone, promised hidden knowledge to initiates, but demanded silence. Mithraic rituals required descent into dark, enclosed spaces, mimicking death and rebirth. These systems weren't cults in the modern pejorative sense, but they introduced a critical idea. Truth is layered, and some layers destroy the unready. Cosmic horror inherits this structure. Its cults are not irrational, they're over-rational. They grasp a truth deeper than civilization's myths, and like the mysteries, they strip away the comfort of surface understanding. But unlike their historical counterparts, these fictional cults offer no reunion, no return, only exposure. Eastern traditions offer further depth. In certain Buddhist schools, the self is a fiction, temporary, constructed, void of essence. The concept of shunyata, or emptiness, destabilizes all categories. In the wrong hands, or the right horror story, this becomes a gateway to cosmic indifference. Some modern writers echo this in depicting cults that worship absence itself, not gods, but voids, not creation, but dissolution. Similarly, in the Gnostic heresies of the early Christian era, the world was believed to be crafted not by a benevolent God, but by a blind, mad demiurge. Salvation lay not in worship, but in knowing, a knowing so dangerous that early Gnostic groups were branded heretics and erased. Here lies a chilling precedent, a cult that worships not because it loves the divine, but because it recognizes it. Horror emerges not from darkness, but from clarity. The philosophical lineage of these cults runs through modern pessimism as well. Thinkers like Schopenhauer and Nietzsche pulled back the veil of morality and meaning. Schopenhauer's will to live was an endless cycle of suffering. Nietzsche declared God dead and found nothing stable to replace him. In both cases, traditional religion collapsed, but the structure of belief remained. This void is where the cosmic horror cult is born. It fills the absence of meaning with ritual, with purpose, with the worship of entities that do not care if they are worshipped. If Enlightenment philosophy told us the universe is neutral, cosmic horror asked, what if it isn't neutral? What if it's actively incomprehensible? We must also consider colonial anxiety. The 19th and early 20th centuries saw Western empires encountering religious systems they couldn't classify. The otherness of these practices was often exaggerated or distorted, and Lovecraft absorbed that distortion. His cults draw heavily on fictionalized ideas of Afro-Caribbean voodoo, Polynesian rites, and Asian mysticism, but they invert the power dynamic. In his stories, the colonized become the gatekeepers of forgotten knowledge. The margins of empire conceal truths that the modern world has suppressed. It is not an accident that the most terrifying truths come from the places Western maps once labeled terra incognita. The psychological structure of the cult also mirrors dream logic. Carl Jung wrote of the collective unconscious, populated by archetypes that recur across cultures. The cult figure, the priest, the devotee, the witness, reappears in myth after myth. But cosmic horror adds a layer. The cult is aware of its role in the dream. It acts not as participant, but as conduit. This is what makes it unsettling. It doesn't just believe, it knows. And that knowledge is not symbolic. It is literal, spatial, historical. It demands ritual not to access the divine, but to align the self with a deeper geometry of being. Ritual becomes map. This leads us to a symbolic shift. In traditional religions, language bridges the human and the divine. Prayers, chants, mantras. In cosmic horror, language becomes unstable. Cults use tongues that fracture the mind. This draws from real-world mystical traditions where sacred language was believed to transform the world. But here, it transforms the self. The act of speaking opens not a pathway to grace, but a rupture. A syllable mispronounced may open a gate that cannot be closed. This is not metaphor. This is cosmology disguised as liturgy. What emerges from all this is not a single influence, but a convergence. Mystery religions, Eastern metaphysics, Gnostic rebellion, colonial paranoia, philosophical collapse, each contributed a thread. Lovecraft and his successors twisted them into something that felt ancient, yet alien. These cults are not drawn from history. They echo history. Their power lies in recognition. We've seen parts of them before. We've buried the rest. And now we turn to the language they speak, the symbols, chants, and meanings that make their worship intelligible only to those already changed. The word cult traces back to the Latin cultus, meaning care, cultivation, worship. It shares a root with culture. This origin is important. It reminds us that cultic behavior was once considered a form of tending, a ritual attention to something larger than oneself. Only in recent centuries has the term acquired connotations of secrecy, deviance, and danger. In cosmic horror, that shift is complete. Here, a cultist no longer maintains harmony between humans and gods. It preserves knowledge that corrodes meaning. Language itself becomes the tool and the threat. What defines the speech of cosmic cults is not obscurity, but untranslatability. Consider the infamous chant from the Call of Cthulhu. Finglui mgulwanaf, Cthulhu, Rlier, Wagahnagul, Ftagn. It looks like language, but resists comprehension. Lovecraft claimed it was meant to be an actual human pronunciation of the name of the thing, suggesting a phonetic trace of the unutterable. The chant sounds almost decipherable, structured enough to hint at syntax, foreign enough to unsettle. This ambiguity creates what we might call semantic vertigo, the moment when sound implies meaning, but the mind cannot grasp it. The chant works not through direct translation, but through suggestion. It's not what it says, it's what it refuses to say clearly. This refusal is not accidental. It aligns with the broader function of language in cosmic horror, to reveal limits. Human languages evolved to describe a small, habitable world, tables, emotions, names, seasons. They break when forced to describe non-Euclidean angles or timeless geometries. Cults exploit this break. They use syllables that bend syntax, letters that don't belong to any known alphabet. Consider the fictional Pnakotic manuscripts or the Necronomicon, filled with diagrams that seem halfway between symbol and hallucination. These texts are not meant to be read. They are meant to unread the reader. The more one understands, the less stable one becomes. Words aren't vehicles of meaning. They're contagions. This inversion of language mirrors an ancient fear. Across cultures, sacred words have always been treated with caution. In Kabbalistic traditions, the true name of God is hidden to prevent misuse. In Islamic mysticism, certain verses are believed to hold esoteric power. The idea that a word could shape or destroy reality is not unique to horror. Cosmic horror radicalizes this idea. It posits that some words don't belong in human mouths, and that saying them is not an invocation, but a surrender. The cultist does not speak to the god. The cultist speaks in place of the god, and lets something else in. Symbols function the same way. Cults mark their spaces with sigils that resemble spirals, tentacles, or eye-like glyphs. These are not decorative. They distort perception. The spiral, for instance, recurs frequently, a shape that suggests infinity, descent, and untraceable origin. It implies motion without end. In Lovecraft's mythos, the spiral often appears in dreams or carved into stone, always on the threshold of transformation. The viewer doesn't understand it. They feel it. Like a visual version of the chant, the sigil bypasses cognition and goes straight to instinct. In this way, cultic symbols act more like psychological triggers than messages. Some texts, both fictional and real, echo this function. The Voynich manuscript, a real-world codex written in an undeciphered language, has been compared to Lovecraft's invented grimoires. It offers pages of botanical drawings, an alien script that scholars cannot read. Its power lies in precisely this opacity. Similarly, in cosmic horror, The cult's sacred texts often contain illustrations that resemble hallucinations more than diagrams. They are not tools for communication. They are tools for conversion. To see the page is to begin believing, not by persuasion, but by disorientation. Even silence plays a role. In many stories, cultists are depicted as mute or chanting in synchronized trance. Speech becomes ritualized, emptied of semantic content, but filled with function. The ritual doesn't need to be understood by participants. It only needs to be performed. This mirrors certain real-world traditions, where ritual words are repeated long after their original meanings are forgotten. But in cosmic horror, that forgetfulness is weaponized. It's not accidental. It's sacred. The cultist is a vessel, not an interpreter. The less they understand, the more they belong. Taken together, these linguistic features create a structure of estrangement. The cult's language is not just foreign. It's structurally incompatible with human understanding. It doesn't bridge gaps. It reveals them. Every chant, every sigil, every unreadable diagram reinforces the same idea. The world we think we know was built on shallow assumptions. The cult doesn't offer answers. It offers symbols and lets them do the damage. This prepares us for the next question. If language and symbol work to create unease, how do these stories convince us that the cults themselves are real? What makes their mythology feel authentic, as though drawn from history rather than invention? The answer lies in the mechanics of storytelling, in the art of building myth from fragments, and in the power of incomplete records. The most terrifying cults in cosmic horror are not frightening because of what they do. They are frightening because they feel discovered. Not written, not invented, found. Lovecraft understood this. From his earliest stories, he constructed fictional myths using the tools of academic authority, citation, lost documents, regional folklore, and named institutions. His cults appear through police reports, faded journal entries, and linguistic analyses from Miskatonic professors. This framing does more than add realism. It creates the illusion of depth, of a world too large to fully map. Horror arises not from spectacle, but from suggestion. The reader feels they've stumbled onto something already in motion, something vast, partial, and never fully explained. Lovecraft's technique echoes real-world historical methods. Historians rarely tell complete stories. They work from fragments, letters, bones, ruins. Cosmic horror replicates this. It offers readers partial truths, enough to imply a full structure, but never enough to confirm it. Consider the Call of Cthulhu. The cult is never directly observed. Instead, we piece it together through a dead professor's notes, a murdered inspector's records, and an artist's dreams. Each source introduces contradictions and gaps. This is intentional. Myth, after all, is not a clean narrative. It is layered, inconsistent, and alive. The more fractured the testimony, the more authentic it feels. This approach aligns with folkloric tradition. Real folklore often contains overlapping versions of the same tale. Motifs repeat, details shift, timelines contradict. This isn't a flaw, it's the texture of oral transmission. Lovecraft and his successors mimic this by letting stories bleed into each other. The Necronomicon is cited across multiple tales. Names like Yog-Sothoth, Leng, and R'lyeh appear in disconnected narratives. The reader begins to map connections, to theorize, to speculate. In doing so, they participate in the myth-building. The cult becomes not just a narrative element, but an interpretive challenge, an unfinished puzzle scattered across fictional history. Fabricated scholarship plays a key role. Lovecraft created a web of invented authorities: Theodorus Velitas, R.W. Chalmers, John Dee, who translated, annotated, and argued over arcane texts. These figures lend the cults an intellectual lineage. We are not reading fiction. We are reviewing the aftermath of encounters. This technique mirrors the structure of conspiracy theories, where footnotes, diagrams, and misused academic language create the illusion of legitimacy. Cosmic horror exploits this effect without collapsing into satire. It never declares this is real, but whispers, you already know it is. Physical artifacts reinforce this effect. Maps of fictional cities, sketches of non-Euclidean idols, handwritten notes in fictional grimoires. All these evoke archaeological evidence. The idea is simple. If a reader can see the cult's relics, even in drawn form, they become harder to dismiss. Many modern horror games and films build on this strategy. Textures matter, so does inconsistency. A symbol carved into a stone wall means little. A nearly erased version of that same symbol, scratched into 3 unrelated locations, that begins to feel like history. Repetition without explanation breeds myth. Yet myth requires restraint. Lovecraft rarely described cult rituals in detail. There are chants, yes, symbols, but the mechanics are left vague. This is not laziness. It is narrative design. The moment a ritual is explained, it becomes manageable. Its logic can be followed, but horror thrives in the ungraspable. By withholding detail, the writer forces the reader to imagine worse. The same applies to the gods themselves. Cthulhu is not frequently active. His cultists act on faith. The absence of the divine reinforces the myth's depth. It makes the belief seem generational, ancestral, passed down, not invented. Crucially, these myths don't exist in isolation. Later writers expanded the mythos through collaboration. August Derleth, Clark Ashton Smith, and others built on Lovecraft's foundations, adding locations, deities, and new cults. This multiplicity mimics real-world religious evolution. Sects split, texts diverge, sacred meanings change. As different authors described the same gods in different ways, the mythos gained complexity. Inconsistency became realism. The cult became more than a literary device. It became a shared hallucination sustained by narrative accumulation. The result is a mythology that behaves like memory. It shifts over time. It resists full understanding. It rewards rereading, remapping, retheorizing. And it all begins with small traces. A half-burned page, a weathered carving, a broken chant. These fragments tell us nothing directly, but together they imply a hidden whole. That implication is what gives the cult its power, which leads us now into the next layer, the core ideas these cults represent. What does it mean to worship something that does not love, does not punish, does not even notice? Why do these believers cling to rituals that promise only madness, entropy, and dissolution? To understand that, we must move from the historical and symbolic to the philosophical. Cosmic horror cults do not promise transcendence. They promise contact, not with the divine, but with something older and indifferent, forces that existed before life and will remain long after its end. To grasp their philosophy is to enter a worldview without human centrality. There is no salvation, no progress, no moral order. The universe is not hostile. It's irrelevant. This is the first and most destabilizing idea these cults embody: insignificance. The believer is not elevated. They are reduced. They do not matter. And this is precisely why they are free to see the truth. In The Call of Cthulhu, one cultist says, The great old ones spoke to the first men. Dreams brought them. That line suggests a reversal. Humans did not discover gods. The gods dreamed us. Cults and cosmic horror adopt this inversion as doctrine. Meaning doesn't emerge from existence. It precedes and overwhelms it. This belief transforms insignificance from a fear into a principle of faith. The cultist worships because they have abandoned hope, not because they seek it. They align themselves with vastness precisely because it crushes them. The ego is not tested, it is erased. This leads us to the second core concept, entropy. Time in cosmic horror is not linear. It spirals, collapses, stretches. Lovecraft's mythos is filled with ancient civilizations buried under even older ruins. Texts describe aeons, not centuries. Worship often centers on return, not future. The old ones are not coming, they are awakening. This vision of time is deeply entropic. The universe is not building toward climax, but collapsing toward origin. Cults mirror this process. Their rituals are often described as cyclical, degenerative, or regressive. The worshipper does not evolve. They unbecome. Entropy also infects identity. In the shadow over Innsmouth, hybrid descendants of deep ones slowly transform, losing their humanity. The process is not framed as tragic. It is inevitable. This reinforces the cultic embrace of decay. Transformation is not failure, it is revelation. One does not fall into madness. They shed illusion. The cultist views entropy not as destruction, but as truth revealing itself. If death is the end of form, then entropy is the end of fiction. In this worldview, entropy is not a process to resist. It is sacred law. Third comes the idea of dream reality collapse. In many mythos stories, dreams are not private. They are transmissions. Gods speak through them. Rituals occur within them. Entire realms, like Lovecraft's dreamlands, exist outside waking logic. Cultists often report visions, speak in trance, or act without conscious memory. This blurs the line between external influence and internal instability. Are they possessed, or simply perceiving more than others? Cosmic horror never answers. But the implication is clear. Waking reality is not the baseline. It is a limited frequency, tunable, distortable, and eventually disposable. Consider this carefully. If dreams carry truth, then sanity becomes a kind of blindness. The cultist does not lose touch, they gain it. But what they touch cannot be born without disintegration. This connects to Harlan Ellison's idea that the universe is not only stranger than we imagine, but stranger than we can imagine. In such a context, belief is not based on comprehension. It is based on exposure. The dream is not metaphor, it is instruction, and once received, it changes everything. A fourth and often overlooked concept is alignment without morality. Cosmic horror cults do not serve good or evil. They serve alignment with forces that predate ethics. In traditional religion, moral codes reinforce divine will. In these cults, morality is noise. What matters is attunement. This is why sacrifice recurs. Not because the gods demand it, but because such acts dissolve social bonds. The cultist must sever ties to the human. Kindness, guilt, and love are rendered obsolete. Worship becomes a form of geometric positioning. One aligns with the truth, regardless of consequence. Finally, there is self-erasure. Cults in cosmic horror often involve masks, robes, and collective chanting. These are not just aesthetic choices. They embody philosophical submission. The individual dissolves into ritual. In the festival, the narrator joins a procession where identity vanishes. I beheld the awful truth, and I shrieked aloud. This Response is typical. The final revelation is not illumination, but collapse. The cultist does not become divine. They become less themselves. Belief is not additive. It is corrosive. Each of these concepts, insignificance, entropy, dream reality collapse, moral erasure, and self-dissolution, forms a lattice of cosmic horror thought. Together, they explain why cults in this tradition are so unsettling. They don't merely contradict our beliefs. They make belief itself irrelevant. In their world, to know is to dissolve. To worship is to vanish. To awaken is to end. But what then do they awaken to? What are these cults actually worshiping? What kinds of entities or principles exist beyond their chants and sigils? To understand the object of their devotion, we now turn to the beings themselves, the great old ones, the dreamland's dwellers, and the shapeless forces whose presence cannot be ignored. Cosmic horror cults do not worship deities in the traditional sense. They align themselves with entities, not embodiments of good or evil, but of scale, of chaos, of time untethered. These forces are rarely named with precision, and when they are, the names themselves function as incantations. Each entity destabilizes fundamental categories: life, death, thought, matter. The terror lies not in what they do, but in what they are. Their worship is not devotional, it is gravitational. Among these, Cthulhu remains the most recognizable. First introduced in The Call of Cthulhu, 1926, Cthulhu is not a god in the Abrahamic sense. It does not judge, guide, or offer salvation. It sleeps in Arlia, a sunken city whose geometry defies Euclidean order. The cult that serves it is fragmented across continents, speaking in dreams, preparing for when the stars are right. What defines Cthulhu is latency. Its horror lies in dormancy, in the promise of return. Its physical form, a fusion of cephalopod, dragon, and human, is less important than its psychic reach. It would be mercy to forget, writes Lovecraft. But forgetting is no protection. Cthulhu dreams, and those dreams spill outward. Then there is Nyarlathotep, the crawling chaos. Unlike the other entities, Nyarlathotep walks among humans. It speaks, it deceives. It appears in 1,000 forms, always mocking understanding. In the dreams in the witch house and the haunter of the dark, Nyarlathotep is invoked through rituals that blend science with sorcery, dream with waking. Cults devoted to it often appear ecstatic, even joyful. This is key. Unlike the distant dread of Azathoth or the slumbering threat of Cthulhu, Nyarlathotep offers interaction, terrible but intimate. Worshippers do not fear him, despite his cruelty. They are drawn to him because of it. Where Cthulhu represents cosmic latency and Nyarlathotep embodied chaos, Azathoth exists as the conceptual boundary of being. Called the blind idiot god, Azathoth sits at the center of the universe, mindless, surrounded by piping flutes. It is not malevolent. It is indifferent to the point of incoherence. Some cults believe Azathoth dreams all of reality, and that when it wakes, the dream ends. Others seek to merge with it, to be dissolved into its formlessness. This is not nihilism in the moral sense. It is ontological unmaking. To worship Azathoth is to desire the erasure of identity, causality, and form itself. Shub-Niggurath, the black goat of the woods with 1,000 young, introduces an inversion of fertility. Its cults are often rural, secretive, and focused on rituals of birth and transformation. But where traditional fertility deities promise growth, Shub-Niggurath births monstrosity. Its young are not children. They are limbs, spores, aberrations. The horror here lies in proliferation without order. Where Azathoth is void, Shub-Niggurath is excess. Cults devoted to it often dissolve boundaries between self and species. In The Whisperer in Darkness, for instance, creatures bred by unnatural unions suggest this collapse. The Dreamland's beings occupy another register entirely. These entities inhabit realms accessible only through dreams, but they act with consistency and will. Creatures like the moon beasts, the Zoogs, or the priests of the elder gods operate according to laws unknown in the waking world. Cults associated with them often practice dream rituals, chanting in sleep, astral projection, waking with symbols etched into the skin. In this cosmology, dreams are not escapes, they are arenas, and the entities within them are just as real as any waking god, perhaps more so. It is important to note what unites these beings. They resist coherence. Each one destabilizes at least one fundamental human assumption. Cthulhu collapses the boundary between consciousness and geography. Nyarlathotep erodes the line between savior and destroyer. Azathoth renders agency meaningless. Shub-Niggurath turns life itself into horror. The Dreamlands reveal that internal experience can be externally manipulated. These are not metaphorical disruptions. They are ontological ones. The cults that form around these entities do not do so because of promised reward. There is no heaven, no vengeance, no enlightenment. What draws worshippers is proximity. These entities do not demand faith. They produce it as a side effect of contact. Often, the cultist does not choose to believe. They have seen too much to disbelieve. In this way, the entity is not the object of worship. It is the source of irreversibility. Once known, it cannot be unknown. The mind bends around it, or breaks. But not every cultist breaks in the same way. Some become conduits, spreading the word. Others retreat into ritual, clinging to structure. Still others lose their minds entirely. This leads us to the next question. What happens to a human who touches the unthinkable? How does madness function, not as failure, but as the natural outcome of knowing? In cosmic horror, madness is not a defect. It is a consequence. The moment a human encounters true cosmic scale, whether through visions, artifacts, or entities, they are changed, not metaphorically, not emotionally, structurally. Madness in this context is not the collapse of the mind. It is the mind conforming to a new geometry. It adjusts, painfully, to a reality never meant to be seen clearly. Cults provide a framework for that adjustment. They do not prevent madness. They shape it. Consider the narrative structure of the Dunwich Horror. Wilbur Whateley is not mad in the traditional sense. He is perfectly sane within the logic of his purpose. It is the townspeople, clinging to normalcy, who appear naive. Wilbur's education at Miskatonic University is not to learn. It is to locate the Necronomicon and complete his father's ritual. His knowledge of Yog-Sothoth doesn't destroy him. It empowers him briefly. Yet his body still deteriorates. His twin, invisible and immense, cannot be contained. Their story illustrates a fundamental point. Contact with cosmic truth grants clarity, but not control. The mind may accept. The body resists. In many mythos stories, madness follows a similar trajectory. It begins with curiosity, escalates through exposure, and ends in either destruction or assimilation. The narrator of the Call of Cthulhu reconstructs the cult's history through newspaper clippings and testimonies. He is rational, methodical, even clinical. But by the end, he concludes, "I shall never sleep calmly again when I think of the horrors that lurk ceaselessly behind life." This is not panic, it's awareness. His fear is not of harm, but of truth. Madness becomes a byproduct of expanding perception beyond tolerable bounds. Cults provide ritual structure to absorb that expansion. Their chants, symbols, and hierarchies stabilize members who would otherwise shatter. This mirrors real-world responses to trauma, repetition, symbolization, group cohesion. In mythos fiction, these rituals do not eliminate madness, they channel it. A lone dreamer haunted by visions may spiral into incoherence. A cultist, by contrast, repeats the chant, traces the sigil, surrenders to the role. Identity becomes scaffolding. Belief functions as architecture around a mental collapse that has already occurred. This leads to a crucial distinction. In traditional horror, madness isolates. In cosmic horror, madness connects. It is contagious. The dreamer dreams because Cthulhu dreams. The cultist sees the black void behind time because Shub-Niggurath has turned her gaze toward him. The mind is not producing delusion, it is receiving signal. The implication is devastating. Insanity is not divergence from reality. It is reality acknowledged. As Lovecraft wrote, the most merciful thing is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. Cults do correlate. That is their horror. Different cults exhibit different relationships with madness. The esoteric order of Dagon treats transformation as religious destiny. Descendants slowly mutate into deep ones, and their mental state shifts in tandem. What appears as psychosis from the outside is, within the cult, fulfillment. In contrast, Nyarlathotep's followers often experience madness as ecstasy. Their rituals are wild, euphoric, even joyful, because he speaks, he touches, he answers. This inversion, madness as connection rather than breakdown, destabilizes moral categories. These people are not suffering. They're participating. From their perspective, the rest of us are blind. This introduces a disturbing possibility. If madness is a response to the real, then sanity may be a kind of protective illusion. The cultist is not deluded, they are exposed. In many stories, those who refuse to see are the ones who remain whole. But this wholeness comes at the cost of ignorance. The cultist chooses, or is compelled, to look deeper. What they lose in coherence, they gain in accuracy. Their madness is not dysfunction. It is alignment with a larger, crueler system. We must pause here, because this is where cosmic horror diverges most from other genres. Madness is not a tragic fall, nor a moral punishment. It is simply what happens when a human mind collides with scale, with time, with things that never evolved to be perceived. Cults do not resist this transformation. They institutionalize it. They make room for it. In doing so, they become shelters for broken minds, not to fix them, but to give them new purpose. Yet not all who go mad stay within the cult. Some write journals, some scream in asylums, some vanish, and some reach another stage altogether, revelation. This brings us to the most dangerous aspect of these cults, what they know, what they should not know. Forbidden knowledge lies at the center of their existence. Not knowledge in the empirical sense, but something older, viral, and irreversible. Cosmic horror does not fear monsters. It fears information. Forbidden knowledge is the mythos cult's true sacrament. Texts, visions, fragments of truth that the human mind was never designed to hold. What makes this knowledge forbidden is not censorship or secrecy. It is destabilization. These are truths that do not expand the known world. They shatter the framework that makes knowing possible. Once received, they cannot be unlearned. The mind doesn't merely struggle to contain them. It restructures itself around their presence. What results is epistemic collapse, the disintegration of meaning itself. In Lovecraft's mythos, this collapse often begins with a book. The Necronomicon is the most infamous example, not because of what it teaches, but because of what it implies. It presents a universe where gods are not moral agents, where humans are not central, and where time is cyclical and meaningless. The book never speaks directly. It fragments, contradicts, hints. This ambiguity is intentional. It bypasses the intellect and corrodes from within. Readers don't finish the Necronomicon, they succumb to it. The Cult in the Call of Cthulhu, 1926, marks the definitive origin point of the cosmic horror cult as we now recognize it. Though earlier weird tales touched on forbidden rites and monstrous deities, Lovecraft's approach fused horror with anthropological texture. His genius lay not in invention, but presentation. The Cthulhu cult is never directly encountered in full. Instead, it is reconstructed from ship logs, police reports, and a dead professor's scattered notes. The result is a cult that feels more unearthed than narrated. It is simultaneously localized and global. Swamp dwellers in Louisiana chant the same phrases as islanders near Ponape. Finglui mgluanaf Cthulhu relie wagah nagel ftagn. The repetition implies a network, not a religion, but an infection. The cult's distribution suggests not diffusion, but memory. It's not that the cult spread, re-emerged. Lovecraft writes, "There had been eons when other things ruled on the earth, and they have come back from the stars and rule once more." This motif recurs throughout his stories. Cults are never new. They are returns. Their practices do not evolve. They persist. This gives them the weight of deep time. The implication is chilling. Belief in the great old ones is not a superstition. It is a recurrence, tied to forgotten epochs beneath our historical record. Cults are not fringe groups. They are continuity fragments from a world that predated ours. In the Dunwich Horror, 1929, this idea becomes personal. The Whately family's worship of Yog-Sothoth is not communal. It's genetic. Wilbur Whately is the product of an interdimensional union, his purpose orchestrated from birth. Here, cultic behavior becomes biological imperative. Wilbur doesn't convert. He is cult. The family's rituals, guarded books, hidden altars, livestock disappearances, lack the global web of the Cthulhu cult, but add another layer, secrecy embedded in rural isolation. The horror emerges slowly, not from mass worship, but from lineage. Yog-Sothoth cultism is not about community. It's about blood, about what gets passed down when no one's watching. The festival, 1925, an earlier but thematically essential tale, focuses on ancestral memory and occult survival. A man visits a coastal town to participate in a Yuletide ritual, only to discover the townsfolk are undead, and the ceremony descends into subterranean horror. The ritual is old. The narrator's participation is expected. It was the Yuletide that men call Christmas, though they know in their hearts it is older than Bethlehem and Babylon, older than Memphis and mankind. Here, Lovecraft ties cult activity not to exotic lands, but to Western holidays. The implication is uncomfortable. Even the most familiar traditions might mask something inhuman. Beneath ceremony lies something unspeakably ancient. Each of these stories layers the same core idea. Cults are not anomalies. They are traces of earlier truths, deliberately forgotten. But Lovecraft was careful not to codify. He rarely described rituals in detail, never offered full theology. The ambiguity made these cults feel real. Real cults don't publish manifestos. They leave behind inconsistent records. And the more readers try to reconcile contradictions across stories, the more they participate in the mythos. The cult isn't just on the page. It spreads through the act of reading. These stories also share narrative structure. Cults are rarely introduced early. Instead, they are revealed through investigation. A letter, a tomb, a voice on the wind. Their existence is inferred, never confirmed in full. This keeps them in the realm of implication. When Wilbur Whately dies, his brother's voice booms across the hills. "Father, Father, I am your son." It is not explanation. It is revelation. The cult's belief system is never detailed, but we understand its power. The reader, like the characters, is always one step behind. This pacing reflects the mythos's deeper claim. Full knowledge is fatal. The closer you get, the less you remain. Intertextually, Lovecraft's stories establish a modular universe. Entities, cults, and books appear across tales, never fully linked, but thematically resonant. The Necronomicon is cited in The Dunwich Horror, The Dreams in the Witch House, and At the Mountains of Madness. Its content shifts slightly, depending on the source, yet always conveys the same effect: forbidden history cloaked in fractured scholarship. The cults mirror this. They are never identical, but always rhyming. A chant in one story echoes a dream in another. A symbol glimpsed in a cave reappears in a professor's notebook. These fragments do not resolve. They accumulate. This accumulation is key to their power. Early stories suggest that each cult has partial knowledge. None understands the full truth, but taken together, their beliefs sketch a larger cosmology, a puzzle of incompatible truths. That is the essence of cosmic horror. Not clarity, but saturation. The more you read, the more connections you see. And the more those connections resist synthesis. This fractal incoherence feels real because real knowledge behaves the same way. There is no center, only echoes. These foundational stories establish the rules of the cosmic horror cult: secrecy over spectacle, implication over explanation, belief without reward. But they also laid groundwork for expansion. Later stories would deepen these themes, introduce new ritual forms, and shift the cultist's role from background element to central focus. With this shift, the horror would not just lie in what the cults believe, but in why they believe it. To trace this evolution, we now turn to two key case studies. The Shadow over Innsmouth, 1936, is not only one of Lovecraft's most atmospheric tales, it is arguably the most thorough exploration of a cosmic horror cult embedded within an entire human society. Here, the cult is not a hidden sect operating from the shadows. It is the town. The narrative follows a gradual discovery, the realization that Innsmouth's population is involved in a pact with the Deep Ones, amphibious, immortal beings who dwell in the ocean and interbreed with humans. The horror comes not from sudden revelation, but from an extended exposure to something deeply wrong. The streets are too quiet, faces look almost human, and in the decaying town, the cult does not whisper. It stinks of salt and rot. The narrator initially interprets the town's oddities through a rational lens: poverty, inbreeding, decay. But the story pivots when he speaks with Zadok Allen, the town drunk, who recalls the founding of the esoteric order of Dagon. Captain Obed Marsh, a sea trader, encountered the Deep Ones on distant islands and brought their worship and their power home. Through ritual, sacrifice, the townspeople gained wealth and fish. In exchange, they offered devotion and eventually genetic continuity. They'd come from the deep water, and the children would look human at first, but afterward they'd begin to take on the look. This isn't just a cult, it's an agreement, transactional, generational, irreversible. Narratively, this cult serves multiple functions. First, it externalizes cosmic horror's theme of decay. The town's crumbling infrastructure mirrors the erosion of its humanity. The physical degeneration of Innsmouth's residents, bulging eyes, flat noses, grayish skin, reflects an ontological transformation. They are not disguising monstrosity, they are becoming it. Second, it complicates the moral axis of the mythos. The cultists are not insane or coerced. They made a calculated choice. Marsh sought power and longevity for his people. His motives are comprehensible, even logical. The horror lies in their success. The deep ones honor the deal. This cult is also notable for its scale. Unlike previous stories where cults are isolated cells, Innsmouth is an ecosystem. The esoteric order of Dagon dominates local governance, economy, and religion. The church is a front. The town hall is compromised. Rituals occur not in secret, but under civic authority. This blurring of institutional and cultic power grounds the horror in bureaucratic realism. There's no escape because the entire structure is complicit. The narrator's attempts to flee are almost absurd. How does one escape a geography? Thematically, Innsmouth reframes cosmic horror through the lens of inheritance. At the story's climax, the narrator discovers he is a descendant of the Marsh family. His dreams intensify, his features begin to change, and then, the final inversion, he accepts it. I shall dwell amidst wonder and glory forever. The cult's function here is transformative. It does not merely destroy, it reclaims. What began as revulsion ends in revelation. The narrator's horror shifts into awe. The cult does not lie. It simply waits. This acceptance raises disturbing questions. Was the narrator always destined to return? Did he resist because he was ignorant, or because he feared truth? The cult's rituals, their secrecy, even their violence, all take on new meaning once we view them from within. The reader is left without resolution. The horror is not the deep ones. It is the narrator's peace. By becoming part of the cult, he finds coherence. And by losing his humanity, he gains clarity. This transformation captures cosmic horror's deepest fear. That knowledge not only breaks the mind, but replaces it. Intertextually, Innsmouth expands the mythos by embedding the deep ones into a larger metaphysical network. The mention of Nyarlathotep, the underwater city, and Dagon links sea worship to earlier mythic structures. Later authors would use this foundation to introduce related cults, connecting maritime worship to global patterns. Innsmouth, then, is not an isolated incident. It is a template. What the shadow over Innsmouth ultimately reveals is that the most terrifying cults are not those who kill or deceive. They are those who offer continuity, who replace our dying world with something older, colder, and far more stable. In that offer lies their seduction. In that stability lies their horror. Our next case study, the Dunwich Horror, shifts the focus again, away from coastal decay and toward rural isolation, monstrous birth, and a different kind of cult, one not inherited, but engineered. If the shadow over Innsmouth presents cultic horror as social inheritance, the Dunwich Horror, 1929, offers a different mechanism, deliberate conjuration. Here, the cult is not a community, but a bloodline, a dark experiment disguised as rural degeneration. The Whateleys, isolated in the hills of western Massachusetts, represent a degenerated family deeply entangled with forces beyond the human. Unlike Innsmouth's multi-generational pact with sea beings, The Whately cult has a singular purpose: to bring Yog-Sothoth into the world. This goal is not metaphorical. It is reproductive, architectural, and apocalyptic. The story begins with the birth of Wilbur Whately, a child of unnatural origin. His father is unnamed in polite society, but within the cultic logic of the tale, he is plainly identified. Yog-Sothoth is the gate. Wilbur grows at an inhuman pace, speaks ancient languages, and seeks the complete version of the Necronomicon, not for knowledge, but for ritual. The Whately's farmhouse becomes a site of unnatural phenomena: locked doors, animal mutilations, strange sounds. Wilbur is not the end goal. He is a caretaker for something worse: his invisible monstrous twin, born alongside him and hidden in the attic. This detail introduces a key innovation in mythos cult narrative: invisible worship. The townspeople suspect the Whateleys are strange, even dangerous, but no one sees the full picture. The rituals are half overheard. The signs are misread. The horror grows in secrecy, protected by geography and social distance. What the story dramatizes is the failure of perception. As with many cosmic horror cults, the observer is always behind the truth. Even the academics from Miskatonic University brought in to contain the threat can only piece together fragments until the final moments. Yog-Sothoth, as the entity at the center of this worship, represents time-space collapse. Described as a congeries of iridescent globes, it is not a being in the traditional sense. It is described as the gate, the key, and the guardian of the gate, a paradox embodied. Cults devoted to it don't seek favor, they seek passage. Wilbur's mother, Lavinia Whately, is depicted as albino, deformed and mentally unwell, visual cues of inbreeding and madness. But her function is ritualistic. She births not a son, but a portal. This is a fundamental shift. The body becomes sacrament. Cult, in this story, is architecture for an opening. Narratively, the Dunwich Horror does two things. First, it moves the cult from a public threat to a hidden existential risk. Unlike Innsmouth, there is no town-wide conspiracy. The horror rests within a single house, guarded by ignorance and apathy. Second, it stages the failure of containment. The university scholars, representatives of Enlightenment rationality, manage to close the gate and destroy the invisible twin. But this victory feels hollow. The cost of revelation remains. The landscape has already been altered. The hills trembled. The trees shook. Something far away groaned. The sense of a greater network, of recurrence, lingers. The cult's significance also lies in its familial transmission. There is no mass conversion, no recruitment. The Whateleys do not preach, they prepare. This internalization reflects cosmic horror's fascination with inevitability. Wilbur doesn't choose his path. He is bred for it. Even his death, trampled by a guard dog while attempting to steal the Necronomicon, feels ritualistic. His corpse is not fully human. His skin sloughs off. Hooves protrude. The story doesn't explain his anatomy. It doesn't need to. His existence proves the cult's success. In terms of mythos expansion, the Dunwich Horror gives Yog-Sothoth a cultic presence equal to Cthulhu's. But the worship of Yog-Sothoth operates differently. It isn't externalized through shrines or masses. It happens through transgression, cross-species mating, violation of temporal boundaries, and the use of sacred texts not to honor, but to collapse reality. Yog-Sothoth cultism is a form of existential hacking. It's not belief, it's mechanics. The narrative also suggests that even when the ritual fails, or is stopped, the effect remains. The twin is destroyed, but the landscape is scorched. The villagers, long skeptical, are confirmed in their worst fears, and the Whateleys, though dead, have succeeded in making their family name a permanent stain on the region's memory. Cult activity in cosmic horror is not judged by success or failure. It is judged by impact. The ritual may be stopped, but the principle survives. The Dunwich Horror shows us a different side of cultic horror, not collective devotion, but engineered corruption. A family becomes a conduit. A house becomes a threshold. Worship doesn't look like prayer. It looks like breeding. And what is born is not belief, but rupture. With these two foundational case studies, Innsmouth's social fusion and Dunwich's biological intrusion, we turn to the final axis. How later authors expanded, reinterpreted, and mutated these cultic patterns across new eras, mediums, and ideological frameworks. Lovecraft's mythos was never a closed system. From the beginning, he invited collaboration, sending stories, terminology, and cosmological sketches to a network of correspondents who, in turn, deepened the mythos and altered it. The cults within this shared universe evolved accordingly. What began as shadowy sects with unclear motives became, over time, more diverse, more elaborate, and, paradoxically, less decipherable. Each new author reshaped the cult not merely as a literary device, but as a philosophical reflection of their own anxieties. The result is not continuity, but accretion. Like real mythologies, the mythos grew through contradiction, revision, and echo. August Derleth, Lovecraft's self-appointed literary executor, was the first to impose a theological structure on the mythos. He categorized the entities into elder gods and outer gods, assigning moral polarity where Lovecraft had insisted on cosmic indifference. In Derleth's framework, cults became morally legible. Those who worshipped Azathoth, Nyarlathotep, or Cthulhu served chaos and evil, while others resisted on behalf of an implicit cosmic good. This shift, often criticized for domesticating Lovecraft's amorality, nonetheless transformed cults into vehicles of cosmic conflict. No longer just fragments of ancient truth, they became agents in a war of alignments. Their rituals gained narrative purpose, not just to awaken, but to oppose or preserve. Clark Ashton Smith, by contrast, emphasized style over structure. His cults, often worshippers of dark planetary gods like Tsathoggua, retained a dreamlike, ironic detachment. In stories like The Seven Geeses, rituals are surreal, almost theatrical. Worshippers often misunderstand their gods or die in comedic futility. But beneath this tone lies a chilling consistency. The cults serve beings utterly unconcerned with human life. Where Derleth's cultists serve known powers, Smith's serve unknowable preferences. Their rituals don't fail because they are wrong. They fail because the gods simply lose interest. Robert E. Howard, better known for Conan the Barbarian, contributed by tying mythos elements to historical antiquity. In stories like The Black Stone, cults become ancient remnants of prehistoric civilizations. Blood-soaked, tower-dwelling priests whose chants echo into modern ruins. Here, the horror lies in continuity. These cults never went away. They adapted, concealed, and endured. Howard's contribution made the mythos feel older than Lovecraft's own invented histories. By grounding cosmic horror in a pseudo-archaeological past, he extended the reach of cultic dread backward into time immemorial. Later authors, especially in the late 20th and 21st centuries, broke the mold further. Ramsey Campbell, for example, transplanted Lovecraftian cultism into the grim suburbs and decaying cities of post-industrial Britain. His worshippers are not exotic islanders or rural degenerates. They are neighbors, librarians, bus drivers. The cult becomes ordinary. In stories like The Faces at Pine Dunes or Cold Print, rituals take place in abandoned bookstores or beneath concrete estates. Campbell's innovation was spatial. He moved cosmic horror inward into the domestic. The boundary between ritual space and living space collapses. Caitlin R. Kiernan introduces yet another mutation. Her stories blur the line between dream, trauma, and ritual. Cults in her work often resemble symptoms rather than organizations. Fragmented, semi-aware groups of individuals performing rites without knowing why. In Houses Under the Sea, a journalist investigates a drowned cult and slowly realizes she is becoming part of it. Kiernan's cultists do not seek knowledge. They are haunted by it. Her work reintroduces the idea that the cult is not an entity, but a pattern, something that arises under pressure, like mold or fever. Laird Barron brings the mythos into cosmic crime fiction. His stories, often set in the rural American Northwest, depict cults as intergenerational criminal networks with access to forbidden technologies and occult sciences. In The Croning and Mysterium Tremendum, rituals are precise, terrifying, and designed to leverage cosmic forces. Barron's cults are neither ignorant nor degenerate. They are sophisticated, corporate, scientific, institutional. His work reminds us that mythos cults, like real-world power structures, adapt to the dominant systems of their time. In the age of global capitalism, a cult might wear a lab coat or a CEO's smile. This evolution reveals something profound. The cult in cosmic horror is not a static object. It is a narrative function, a vessel for dread that morphs with each generation. In Lovecraft's time, it embodied fears of degeneration, lost knowledge, and cultural contamination. In later hands, it absorbed new fears of bureaucracy, technology, surveillance, memory, identity. The core remains, a group aligned with something vast and impersonal, but the shape changes. Each iteration reflects not just horror fiction, but the anxieties of its moment. As the mythos expanded, so did its medium. Role-playing games like Call of Cthulhu invited players to investigate and even join cults. Films like The Void, The Endless, and The Ritual updated the imagery for modern audiences. Digital spaces, RGs, forums, and SCP-style entries allowed users to simulate cultic discovery. The mythos cult became interactive, participatory, viral. But no matter the form, the cult remains the clear signpost of cosmic horror's central thesis, that the universe is not only stranger than we imagine, but structured in ways that do not include us. And yet, we cannot look away. We chant. We read. We follow symbols. We join, whether in fiction or in fascination. Next, we move beyond the page, beyond the constructed narrative, into the places where cults linger in rumor, reappear in urban legend, or take new life through art and subculture. We turn now to the cultural and psychological afterlife of the cosmic horror cult. The line between fiction and belief is thinner than most assume. Nowhere is this more evident than in the afterlife of mythos cults, where invented sects, fabricated tomes, and imagined rituals begin to drift into real-world rumor. It is not that people literally believe in Cthulhu, Yog-Sothoth, or Nyarlathotep. Rather, they behave as if such beliefs are possible. A fake book, an altered photo, a stray comment online. These become vectors for something that feels real. The cosmic horror cult, born from fiction, returns as folklore. Not through faith, but through the suggestion of plausibility. The most enduring example is the Necronomicon. Lovecraft openly admitted it was a fabrication, a literary device. Yet over the decades, multiple versions of the book have appeared in print, some as deliberate hoaxes, others as occult manuals written by true believers. The Simon Necronomicon, published in 1977, combined Mesopotamian myth with Lovecraftian terms and was sold as genuine. It gained a cult following. That its origins were dubious seemed irrelevant. What mattered was ritual usability. Like all effective occult texts, it didn't need to be real. It needed to be read. Urban legends followed. Online forums speculated about remote towns with strange traditions. Reddit threads described alleged encounters with isolated groups, worshipping something that watches from the lake. YouTube deep dives link missing persons cases to fictional entities. TikTok creators mimic cultic chants for aesthetic effect, sometimes seriously, sometimes as parody, sometimes without knowing the source. What unites these fragments is not belief in literal gods, but a growing unease that something has returned. The cosmic horror cult, once an artifact of fiction, is now mimicked as if it were rediscovered lore. Alternate reality games, ARGs, weaponize this ambiguity. Projects like Local 58, The Sun Vanished, and The Mystery Flesh Pit. National Park blend cosmic horror, corporate satire, and false documentation to suggest a world where government conspiracies and eldritch forces overlap. Cults in these narratives often resemble the mythos model, secretive, decentralized, and oriented around symbols no one fully explains. Their power lies in how they are experienced, through fake websites, leaked memos, or corrupted footage. They never announce themselves as cults. They just imply coordination. The viewer becomes a participant, and in doing so, joins the tradition. These modern sightings echo older patterns. Consider UFO cults like Heaven's Gate, whose theology resembled Lovecraftian cosmology more than traditional religion. Indifferent cosmic forces, hidden truths, ritual death as escape from false reality. Or the mythos-like framing of conspiracy movements that speak of deep time manipulation, underground societies, and ancient non-human architects of civilization. The line between fiction and delusion is not always clear, and the architecture of cosmic horror, fragmented texts, unreachable truths, unknowable systems, offers a ready-made language for modern paranoia. But why does this imagery persist? Why do people invent or half believe in mythos cults long after the stories end? Part of the answer lies in what cults represent: structure in a meaningless world. In Lovecraft's fiction, cults are not merely symptoms of madness. They are responses to it. They offer pattern, repetition, and ritual. For readers, and for those caught in liminal belief, these structures provide a strange comfort. If the world is ruled by indifference, at least the cult knows. And knowledge, even terrible knowledge, feels better than ignorance. Yet something deeper lingers. The mythos cult is not attractive because it promises salvation. It is attractive because it acknowledges futility. Its rituals are not effective. Its gods do not answer. And still, the worship continues. In this, we see a reflection of the human condition, meaning made despite silence, worship performed in a vacuum, ritual as resistance to entropy, even when the universe doesn't care. Cosmic horror cults persist, not because they offer hope, but because they remove the need for it. The implications are not comfortable. Are we creating these stories to scare ourselves? Or are we circling around something we can't name, can't shake, some ancient shape in our collective mind, waiting to be remembered? The persistence of these myths, hoaxes, and sightings suggests that the cult was never just on the page. It was a mirror, and we keep looking. As mythos cults slipped beyond the page, they found new expressions across visual and interactive media. Film, video games, and music each adapted the imagery, logic, and emotional texture of cosmic horror cults, often without naming them. In these new forms, the cult is no longer just a narrative device. It becomes an atmosphere, an aesthetic, a structure of feeling. Each medium brings its own tools. Film gives the cult a face, games allow the viewer to join, and music recreates ritual through sound. What unites them is not fidelity to Lovecraft, but participation in his pattern. In cinema, mythos cults often appear in disguised form. The Wicker Man, 1973, precedes direct Lovecraftian influence, yet echoes his cultic logic. A seemingly normal village conceals a sacrificial religion rooted in forgotten gods. The horror lies not in the violence, but in the calm coherence of the belief. More recent films push the influence further. The Void, 2016, depicts a hospital besieged by robed cultists whose rites open gateways to another realm. Their motivations are opaque, but their precision implies ancient knowledge. They are not lunatics. They are caretakers of a terrible process. The Endless, 2017, from directors Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead, reframes the cult as a closed temporal loop. Former members return to the site of their youth to find that the cult has not disbanded, but that time itself may not be linear. The members worship a formless entity that enforces endless repetition. There is no salvation, no punishment, only recurrence. Here, the cosmic horror cult becomes a metaphor for entrapment, in ideology, in memory, in the body. The horror is not death, but perpetuation. The ritual never ends. Video games deepen the cultic experience by placing the player within the structure. In Call of Cthulhu, Dark Corners of the Earth, 2005, players infiltrate Innsmouth, interact with the esoteric order of Dagon, and witness firsthand the rituals of the Deep Ones. The horror is gradual, atmospheric. Architecture, speech, and behavior build dread long before direct confrontation. More recently, Bloodborne, 2015, weaves Lovecraftian themes into its very mechanics. Players uncover a hidden religion within the city of Yharnam, worship of the Great Ones. The game never explains the theology, only the effects, transformation, madness, and the collapse of linear time. Every level is a descent into worship, where knowledge is a consumable and a poison. Even indie games like World of Horror, 2020, styled after 1980s Japanese PC games and Junji Ito's aesthetic, resurrect the mythos cult as a daily reality. Players confront rituals, missing townsfolk, and corrupted schools in a small town succumbing to old god influence. The mechanics reinforce helplessness, resource scarcity, permanent consequences, and creeping dread. There is no final victory, only temporary delay. The cult cannot be stopped, it can only be endured. Music channels the cultic through tone, repetition, and immersion. Ritual ambient and drone genres, acts like Sun-O, Lustmord, and Nekrasov, produce compositions that mimic sacred rite, long, sustained tones, wordless chants, field recordings. The experience is not narrative, but entrancing. Some bands, such as Portal or Arctin, push this further by obscuring lyrics entirely, treating vocals as texture. In these works, the listener is not entertained, but inducted. The structure mirrors the cult. The repetition becomes the belief. Black metal, too, has absorbed mythos elements. Bands like The Great Old Ones, Yogth Sothoth, and Arkham Witch explicitly reference Lovecraftian themes. Lyrics often invoke forgotten gods, madness, and rituals beneath dying stars. The appeal is not just aesthetic, it's metaphysical. These genres embrace the insignificance of the self, the violence of revelation, and the romance of entropy. The cult becomes a sonic experience, not doctrine, but resonance. Across these mediums, the cult endures not as content, but as structure. A concealed group, a forgotten truth, a ritual with irreversible consequences. Each adaptation reshapes the form, but the feeling remains, that there are those who know, and that their knowledge is not safe. The audience is drawn in, not just as observer, but as potential initiate. This spread reflects a deeper shift. The cult is no longer just a literary trope. It is a cultural form. It persists because it articulates something modern existence increasingly resembles: fragmentation, secrecy, surveillance, recursion. In this way, it prepares the ground for its next stage, not just in media, but in society itself. The cult becomes metaphor, but also mirror, and in the hands of real people, academics, artists, online communities, it becomes practice. The mythos cult has moved beyond fiction and adaptation into the cultural bloodstream, appropriated, reinterpreted, and reenacted by subcultures, scholars, and communities seeking to understand or embody its patterns. It no longer belongs solely to horror literature. It is referenced in philosophy courses, replicated in occult groups, and even modeled in fandom spaces. This shift isn't accidental. The cosmic horror cult, with its themes of forbidden knowledge, ritual structure, and destabilized identity, resonates across disciplines. It explains without resolving. It attracts without reassuring. It offers not belief, but pattern recognition. Within online subcultures, the language and imagery of mythos cults have become a shared lexicon. Communities like the SCP Foundation and our liminal space build collective mythologies structured like cultic archives. Entries reference unknown rituals, anomalous books, or deities that twist reality itself. What emerges is not horror in the traditional sense, but a sustained atmosphere of informational dread. The audience participates not by observing, but by contributing. They add fragments, speculate connections, and enforce internal logic. This is cult building as collaborative fiction. Its power lies in accumulation, not through a single story, but through 1,000 semi-connected ones. Fan conventions, cosplay, and live-action roleplay, LARP, settings further blur fiction and ritual. Groups reenact summoning rituals from the Call of Cthulhu RPG, design costumes based on Deep One hybrids, or build escape rooms themed around forbidden tomes. These performances are often playful, but they follow the same structure as religious rite: symbolic gestures, shared language, altered identity. Participants know it isn't real, but they act as if it were. This suspension of disbelief mirrors the function of cultic ritual itself. The line between immersion and initiation becomes difficult to define. Academic interest has grown in parallel. University courses examine Lovecraft's work as a lens into cultural anxieties: race, modernity, knowledge collapse. Scholars like S.T. Joshi have cataloged the mythos with near-religious rigor. Others, like Eugene Thacker, explore cosmic horror as a philosophy of pessimism, where the cult represents the human impulse to build meaning against the void. In this reading, mythos cults are not aberrations. They are responses to existential pressure. They externalize the question, what do we do when the universe no longer includes us? Academic writing treats cults not as fantasy, but as metaphorical models of belief formation under ontological threat. occult, and esoteric communities have also engaged directly. While most practitioners treat Lovecraft's entities as fictional constructs, some systems, particularly within chaos magic, treat fiction as functionally real. The Necronomicon is used not as scripture, but as tool. In this context, belief is secondary to effect. The ritual works if it alters perception. Cultic language becomes a psychological device. This aligns uncomfortably well with the mythos itself. Speech that reshapes thought, symbols that bypass reason, names that summon responses whether or not the thing exists. The boundary between literary artifact and operative system dissolves. The cult also appears in political discourse, usually metaphorically. Conspiracy theories often describe elites as members of hidden cabals engaged in unnatural practices. The imagery mirrors mythos cults, ancient knowledge, obscure symbols, coordination beyond detection. While rooted in paranoia rather than literature, the structure is familiar. Cosmic horror gave us the template. The internet filled in the names. The result is a world where belief systems are decentralized, contradictory, and often performative. In such a world, the cult becomes not a belief, but a frame, a way of seeing. This appropriation persists because the cult solves a problem. It offers structure without explanation. It allows for commitment without clarity. It mirrors the internet's own logic, distributed, anonymous, recursive. In a world flooded with information but starved of coherence, the cult becomes a metaphor for how we survive epistemic overload. It organizes dread into ritual. It performs certainty in the face of indifference. Yet this raises questions. Are we using the cult to understand ourselves, or to avoid understanding? Is the comfort it offers any different from the faiths we thought we outgrew? Or has the mythos cult simply inherited that role, updated for a secular, data-saturated world? Whatever the answer, one fact remains. The cult is no longer fiction. It is practice, pattern, and participation. Which brings us to the final implication. Not cultural, but psychological. What does it mean that we keep imagining ourselves into these roles? That we play at knowing the unknowable, worship what does not care, and repeat rituals that promise only entropy? What does that say about the mind that imagines the cult and the world that now seems to reflect it? At its deepest level, the cosmic horror cult is not a fictional organization. It is a psychological metaphor, a response to the unbearable tension between our need for meaning and the universe's refusal to provide it. These cults endure in literature, media, and imagination because they offer something paradoxically comforting, a structure that accepts meaninglessness. In a world that increasingly mirrors the disorientation of Lovecraft's cosmos, fragmented, impersonal, accelerating, the cult appears not as madness, but as adaptation. This adaptation begins with surrender. Traditional religions often promise order, morality, divine justice, personal transcendence. Mythos cults reverse that equation. They worship what is indifferent. They do not plead for protection. They align with disintegration. This reframes worship itself. It is no longer about relationship. It is about position. The cultist does not believe in a God who loves them. They believe in a force that includes them only as a statistical accident, and yet they kneel. This suggests that faith can survive even when hope is gone. Such a posture reveals a troubling truth. Annihilation can be psychologically attractive. The mythos cult embodies a longing to dissolve, to escape individuality, to melt into a system larger than the self, whether cosmic, informational, or spiritual. This is not always framed as horror. In The Shadow over Innsmouth, the narrator ultimately accepts his inhuman heritage with wonder. I shall dwell amidst wonder and glory forever. His fear was not of transformation, but of knowing he must change. Once that fear passed, so did resistance. The cult offers not destruction, but relief. This dynamic mirrors real psychological processes. When people confront meaninglessness through trauma, existential crisis, or overwhelming information, they often turn to systems that simplify. Conspiracy theories, fundamentalism, apocalyptic ideologies. Each functions like a cult. It reorders chaos into narrative, restores agency through ritual, and explains the unbearable by pointing to something larger. The cosmic horror cult is a dramatization of this impulse, but stripped of comfort. It offers the same psychological architecture, minus salvation. Philosophically, the cult collapses boundaries between the human and the non-human. It rejects anthropocentrism. Lovecraft's mythos was built on the premise that humans are not central, that we occupy a minor corner of an uncaring cosmos. The cultist accepts this. Their rituals do not beg to be seen. They acknowledge that they aren't, and yet they continue. In this, they become a model for how belief might persist, even after metaphysical collapse. When there is no divine order, no objective morality, no hope of transcendence, what remains? The ritual, the symbol, the chant, performance as meaning. This leads us to the most disturbing implication. Perhaps belief is not tied to truth at all. Perhaps it only requires structure. The cult, as imagined in cosmic horror, functions even when its god is absent or fictional. Its members obey, remember, and repeat. They do not require results. They require coherence. And in this, the cult becomes not a distortion of thought, but a function of it. It is the mind's immune response to a shattered reality. A loop of gesture that says, we still exist, even if nothing else does. We must pause here. Because what the cosmic horror cult ultimately reveals is not fear of the unknown, but fear of the known, once stripped of illusion. The universe without purpose. The self without continuity. The world as data without story. In this environment, the cult endures because it gives shape to shapelessness. Not explanation, but repetition. Not comfort, but rhythm. And so it persists. In fiction, in performance, in thought. Because it reflects something real. That even in the face of cosmic silence, the human mind will continue to build pattern. To repeat symbols. To kneel before something that cannot hear. Whether that is madness, resilience, or the beginning of something new remains unknown. But the ritual continues. The text remains open. And somewhere, in language we do not yet understand, the chant still echoes.